Good morning. It was a great talks, and after all the great talks, I'm coming, and so it's a great honor for me to be in this meeting and to represent the Texas Southern University. My talk is on the climate change and the water quality. As you heard from all the previous speakers, the water is very important. It is not only the water quality is more important. For all the living organisms, we need water for our existence, and we need clean water for our existence. So the climate change is very much is influencing a lot the water quality, the availability of the water and the water quality, and how it is going to impact the life of the living organisms. So in this particular presentation, this is my research. My research is I'm basically an environmental remote sensing scientist. So I use the satellite imagery to monitor the environmental pollution. So you can actually see by using the satellite imagery is one type of technique where you can actually collect the measurements of throughout the world. Any part of the world, you can actually get a satellite imagery. When you talk about, say, for example, a Landsat satellite image, you can get a satellite image for every 16 days for any part of the world. That is one satellite. We have a lot of different satellites. So when you put together all the satellites for every part of the world, so you will be getting a satellite image every day almost. So when you go back in time, we have the satellite images available from 1970s onwards to till today. So this is a kind of a record which you can compare during the course of the time, how the climate is changing, or how the global warming is happening, and what is the impact of this on the ecosystems. So in this particular research, I am looking at the water quality, especially in the lakes and estuaries around the world, and how the water quality is being changing during the course of the time, during the past 3 to 4 decades. So on the top, you can actually see in the center, what you are seeing is the Lake Erie. Lake Erie is one of the freshwater lakes. It's one of the largest. All the Great Lakes is the largest freshwater lakes in the world. And when you see the Lake Erie, whatever all the green stuff, that is all the scum or the algal blooms. So when you say all the freshwater, when you are having a huge amount of precipitation in that surrounding area, when all the precipitation carries a lot of soil and sediment into the lake, it carries a lot of nutrients like phosphorus and nitrogen. When you have good amount of phosphorus and nitrogen, and when the warm water is there, the water is very hot because of all sunlight. So it is a good recipe for algal blooms. So a very hot, warm water with good amount of phosphorus, nutrients, so you'll be getting a huge amount of algal blooms. So what will happen if you have a huge algal bloom? The oxygen concentration will decrease, and then you can actually see a lot of fish kills. So on the very left side, you can actually see there's a lot of fish kills. So once you have this floating scum, the scum will deprive whatever the organisms are there. It will not get any oxygen. So all the fish will be suffocated, and you will see a mass casualty. And you can't drink any of this water because this is a microcystis, which is a toxin. So the microcystis toxin is a hepatotoxin. It affects the liver. And when you look at the Lake Erie, a lot of cities depend on that water for drinking purpose. So you have Detroit to the west, you have Cleveland to the south, you have Toledo to almost the southwest corner. So all these big cities draw the water from that lake continuously. So if the water is contaminated, if there is a toxin, if you draw, then, and if you pump that water for public water supply, then you are actually affecting the health of all those people. So it is a big issue because of all the warm water. You're having all these algal blooms. On the very right, you can see the satellites. Because of the satellite imagery, where you are getting the satellite images continuously, you can monitor 24 hours what is the water quality, what is the changes that are happening during the course of the time for the last 30 years or so. So global warming have a measurable impact on the water cycle. So whenever there is a global warming, you can actually see the water cycle will, the speed of the water cycle will increase. Whatever the evaporation of the water, it will increase, as a result of which the atmosphere will be holding more warm water. So a warmer climate causes more water to evaporate from both the land and the oceans. Also, a warmer atmosphere can hold the more water. climate change depletes the water quality by increasing the water temperature and lowering the dissolved oxygen. So if you have warm water, and apart from that you have good amount of nutrients, so the oxygen concentrations in the water will decrease. Once the oxygen concentration decreases, so it is having a major impact on all the living organisms, like all the fish and so on in the water. So here is an example of a couple of lakes around the world. On the left side, what you are seeing is Aral Sea. So it is in 1973. Aral Sea is a huge amount of, it's a big water body in southern part of the Europe. And from 1973 to 2016, you can actually see, because of all the increase in the temperature, increase in the carbon dioxide, as the global warming is increasing, so the evaporation of Aral Sea increases, as a result of which by 2016, you can actually see most of the sea got depleted. So once the sea depletes, what will happen? So a lot of the water is gone, so all the sand is exposed. So once you have all this sand, whenever there is a huge amount of wind, all this sand will be churned, and whoever is living in that area, they are actually getting all the dust storms. So those people who are living surrounding the Aral Sea, they are being exposed to the severe health effects such as asthma and all those things, because they are exposed to continuously by the sandstorms and so on. On the right side, what you see is Lake Chad. Lake Chad is located in between the Chad and northern part of Nigeria. Lake Chad is the biggest lake in the country Chad, where most of the people and all the living organisms depend on the Lake Chad, which is a freshwater lake. So from 1972, so if you see by 2016, you can actually see the Lake Chad got shrunk. So most of the water is gone. It is purely got evaporated because of all the climate change. So right now, you are actually, whatever you are seeing, it is a kind of like concentrated murky water. So you cannot use it for agriculture purpose, not useful for drinking purpose. But in case of Chad, that is the only lake. That is the biggest lake in the country Chad. So in some of the tropical countries, in some of the temperate countries, intense precipitation events due to climate change will increase soil, sediment, nutrient, pesticide runoff into the water body. Just like in Texas, when you see within the last year, we have like 3 to 4 20-inch rainfall sequences. So every time it rains a lot of nutrient and sediment, everything goes into the lakes, and in our case, it goes into the estuary, into the Galveston Bay. So whenever you have a huge amount of nutrients into the water body, and you have a sunny days with all the warmness, so it is a good, perfect recipe for algal blooms to bloom. So once you have algal blooms, then you have the fish kills and all those things. So heavy nutrient runoff into warm waters will lead to harmful algal blooms in rivers, lakes, and estuaries. That is the same thing that is being happening in the Great Lakes, especially Lake Erie and so on. So in case of remote sensing is the technology of determining the characteristics of a distant object from electromagnetic waves emanating from and reflecting off the object. The advantage of a satellite is the satellite can see in the wavelengths which we cannot see. So with our naked eyes, we can actually see the visible region, which is blue, green, and red, or any combination of blue, green, and red. So we can actually see only from 400 to 700 nanometers. But with a satellite, you can actually see more than what our visual eyes cannot see. So you can actually see into the infrared wavelength, into the near infrared, far infrared wavelength, and also a thermal wavelengths, so which we cannot see. So by having a satellite imagery, we can actually get more information, what our human eyes cannot see. And the advantage with the satellite is, if you have a satellite there going around the Earth, so as like one of my previous speakers showed in her video, so as the satellite is going around, so continuously, no matter what, the satellite will be getting the image of the Earth, of every part of the world continuously. So like that, we have the satellite image repository from 1970s onwards. So you can actually go back and look at all the 50-year satellite imageries, like every day, and in some cases, like every 16 days. And you can actually compare what's happening to the lakes. Or the lakes are shrinking, what is happening to the algal blooms, and all those things. So you can actually pair up with other data, such as the temperature measurements and other data, and you can actually simulate and see what is the impact of the climate change on all these things. So here is the Lake Erie. Like year after year, we are actually seeing, in case of Lake Erie, we are seeing there is an increase in the algal blooms every summer. So every summer, you get more rainfall, and the summer is the time where the temperature increases. So once the temperature is increased, you will see huge amount of algal blooms. So once the algal blooms happen, these are all microcystis algal blooms. They produce the toxin called as microcystin. So you cannot drink the water, and whatever the fish are there, that are, if you catch the fish, you should not eat the fish because of the toxin will be there in the fish. So all the beaches surrounding the Lake Erie will be closed. So whenever the algal bloom happens, so all the beaches are closed. So it is not only affecting the water quality, not only affecting the causing the food scarcity, it is also causing an impact on the recreation. So all the beaches and everything is closed, so you cannot go into the lake and so on. And the bigger problem is it is a freshwater lake. It is one of the largest freshwater lake which we need to conserve. So in our case, we are having Galveston Bay, so which is a huge estuary. So water quality in Galveston Bay is very important for the economical, ecological, and environmental well-being of Texas Gulf Coast, as it is a tremendous recreation and environmental asset of the United States. So even within the Galveston Bay, we depend on Galveston Bay for a lot of the food resources, like we have the fish, oysters, and so on. So we harvest a lot of seafood from the Galveston Bay, and it is also an important area for the recreation and so on. So we are actually having a project where we are looking at continuously monitoring the Galveston Bay water quality. So here you can actually see on the y-axis, what you are seeing is the chlorophyll. Chlorophyll is the pigment what is seen in the algal blooms. On the x-axis down, what you are seeing is all the data that is collected from 1980 onwards to current. So you can actually see when you look at from 1980s onwards, the chlorophyll concentration is kind of like slowly increasing. So when you hit the recent years from 2004 to 2010, you are actually seeing an increasing in the chlorophyll concentration. The red line, what you are seeing about like 11 to 12 micrograms per liter, that is the threshold. So you should not cross that much for a healthy water. But during the course of the recent years, what you are seeing is there is an increase in the chlorophyll concentration. So that means there is, from time to time, you are seeing more algal blooms in the Galveston Bay. We took this data and we actually modeled and we created a spatial maps for the Galveston Bay. So here on the left side, what you are seeing is from 1985 to 1989. So wherever you are seeing red, that is 55 micrograms per liter of chlorophyll. So we need to have the chlorophyll more in kind of like the blue region. So that is considered to be the optimum. So if it is going into the green, yellow, and red, so that is kind of like very high. You should not see any red. So when you look at 2005 to 2010, the recent years, what you are seeing is you are seeing more algal blooms. So especially where the shipping channel is coming and entering into the Galveston Bay, the West Bay, that is the place where you are having more algal blooms. So you can actually see these algal blooms are spread all over, the east, west, north, and south. So during the course of the time, I think we have the data even from the recent 2010 to 2016, we're actually seeing an increase in the chlorophyll. Why the chlorophyll is increasing? Because if you have more amount of phosphorus and warm water, that is what causes an increase in algal blooms. So we wanted to see what is happening to the phosphorus in this particular Galveston Bay. So we mapped the phosphorus all the way. The x-axis is all the time period, and the y-axis is all the amount of the phosphorus in microgram per liter. So the amount of phosphorus, which is the critical limit, is about like 0.2 microgram, 2.2 mg per liter. But you can actually see during the last 10 years, you are actually seeing a high or increase in the phosphorus concentration. So the more the phosphorus, the warm water, you are actually seeing the more chlorophyll or algal blooms. So once you are having the algal blooms, then you can actually see the fish kills. And in our case, oyster industry is being impacted here. And if you have a large amount of algal blooms, even the navigation will be affected because the ships cannot go through the algal blooms. And in case of Galveston Bay, apart from the usual algal blooms, we have the red tides. So the red tides are the ones which are more toxic. Apart from red tides, we have the yellow tides. So the red tides are the algal blooms which are kind of like reddish. So whenever you have a red tide, then it is kind of like you will see the symptoms like irritation to the eyes and so on. Whenever there is a red tide, all the beaches will be closed, so it will not be allowed for recreation. And most of the time, the swimming and all those things will not be allowed because it will affect the health. So here you can actually see the Lake Erie. So from time to time, no one wants to actually navigate in this type of water. You don't want to go for recreation in this water, isn't it? Even though it is a clean, fresh water, no one wants to go. But the algal blooms is a kind of like a repeated scenario in most of the places. Not only in US, we're actually looking at the algal blooms in parts of the Canadian lakes, parts of the Lake Victoria in Africa, and also part of some of the lakes in India. So in most of the lakes, because of the warm water, huge amount of nutrients, you're having the algal blooms happening. So not only in the rivers, it also in the estuaries and the oceans. So once that happens, then you will see most of the fish kills and your the food security will be impacted. Any questions? Thanks.